And this is a challenge also for private business. Because in my view, my dear friends, without a close partnership with business, the business world, climate change problem would have no solution at all. We have to work in close relationship. We may have different mindsets, but the world is one and the same, the atmosphere is one and the same. We have to act quickly to get economics work, to get mitigation and adaptation at the right scale. We are far beyond, we're running out of time. I would ask your indulgence for the slow progress of the multinational conversations, but I don't see any way we could get into an agreement where the private sector could operate at ease. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. I think that certainly that's a provocative thought, and I'm sure that will elicit some question or comments. Peter, from your point of view, your organization has been instrumental in working on the original cap and trade in the US. We've heard Dr. Tudela kind of being provocative. How do you see this synergy between the various policies and markets and trade?
Well, I'm glad you launched me with Fernando's remarks. It's always difficult when you meet somebody you haven't seen in a long time on a panel, and that just happened to me and Fernando. But I'm going to build off where Fernando was. I just ask those of you in the audience who have some longitudinal experience with this process to reflect what you just heard from a senior official of a very sophisticated country that we call developing. I don't know why we call it that. Excuse us, Fernando. You heard a number of thoughts that are indicative of where we really are and that will help me share with you the few thoughts I want to do. You heard about we need cap and trade, but we need cap and trade plus more things. Fernando did not use the word enforcement, but I would argue when he talked about a complex international system that it will take a lot of different parties working together to regulate and manage, meant that the word enforcement was right there, one step behind the curtain that he was talking about. And there were a number of other thoughts, the need to move beyond the existing CDM, very interesting and wise thoughts. He did not attack anybody in his presentation, as we used to do at some of these meetings. Very interesting. So let me take my position as the concluding share of ideas with you, just to share four simple ones. And if some of them seem obvious to you, that is a good sign on how far we would come. The first one, they asked us to write down some questions. It's the first one. Do climate and development compete? We still are all in these arguments where somebody is saying, but if I carry this burden in the climate area, it will be harder for me to develop. We have to move beyond that false competition. If we do not find a path called climate and development, we will either run aground in our ship or we will go down in the big storm. But there is only one safe harbor, and the only safe harbor is where climate and development are on the same road. I believe the South has learned that more quickly than the North. We all have to learn it, and business has to understand this very, very quickly. It is one road, and one of these days we will rename it the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate and Development. That will happen. So that is not a competition. This has to be a coherence, and I'll come back to that at the end. Second of all, we don't have to get the load sharing right away. Yes, this is all a discussion in part about who is going to bear what costs when. But we only have to get it vaguely right at the beginning. This will be adjusted over and over in circumstances we can't foresee and in ways we cannot imagine. We have to get the basic principles of the load sharing right here, which is that the North must bear more than the South. The North must start cutting earlier than the South. Basically, the rest of the load sharing, if we get those directional arrows right, not only can we not work them out today, we don't have to work them out today. There will be an ongoing mechanism, and there will be many surprises down the road. So the load sharing, we don't have to get it right forever today. As a matter of fact, we will stop all progress if we try and get it all sorted out in the next steps. Where will the money come from? We are talking about a transition to a low-carbon global economy. The money is going to come primarily from two places, I believe. First of all, it will come from the markets in various forms. CDM may be one of those forms, but it will come from the markets, which means ultimately it will be coming from private enterprise. And second of all, it will come from the MFIs, and I'm not talking about the microfinance institutions when I use that phrase. They have leverage, and they have a public function. They are capable of generating enormous amounts of capital, and they are capable, if they have a broad enough mission, of using that capital to leverage other people's capital. Perhaps at last, for the World Bank Group and for the rest of the MFI community, we have a task large enough and bold enough to provide that new purpose for which they have been looking now for a couple of decades. It is up to them in part to seize that. I know they will try and do that this week. I also think it is important, if they do that and expect us to support them, that they come clean and make a break with the high carbon activities in which they are still about. It's time for a simple break on that, and in fact, it wouldn't be very hard to do right now. You don't have to atone for the sins of the past, you just have to come clean going forward. I guess the last question, Andre, so you can take us into questions. And this, here I'm addressing, I guess, primarily some of my American and many of my European friends. Is business the problem? I can get you a lot of conversations on that in certain coffee houses in New York or Paris or Brussels. Is business the problem? That's like asking about a river, is the current the problem? The current is part of what a river is, ladies and gentlemen. There may be problems about the helmsman as we negotiate our way. I guess I should be saying the helms people. And there may be problem about the course. But to say the problem with the river is the current is limiting yourself to some very drastic and not very feasible alternatives. I don't mean by that that business is innocent. I don't mean by that that business doesn't bear great responsibility in this, because we are talking about redirecting the whole course of the economic enterprise on this planet. I am simply saying it is the job of the public sector, governments, civil society, the press, and others to send the correct signals and provide the correct regulatory mechanism for business, and then the current, the most powerful force in the river, will be manageable. And if we do not do that job, the signals, the regulatory structure, reporting it correctly, the current, in the end, will carry us where the current wants rather than where we want. And I'm going to close with a metaphor which I offer with some hesitation. I spent considerable time in India in October because Environmental Defense is trying to understand whether there is something useful we can do in India. And I repeatedly found myself in the argument where a very articulate and intelligent Indian would say to me, but you caused the problem, your tons per capita emission are 20 times ours, and so on. Are many of these arguments true? Yes. Have you all heard them? Yes. Are these arguments going to be with us in some meaningful dimension? Yes. Is it a problem for me as an American that my emissions per year are roughly 20 tons, and for most of the rest of you they're significant? Yes. But there's another part to this picture. We are all lashed to the same train track. The fact that I had more to do with starting the freight train that's around the corner than you did is an important point, but it's not the only point, and it may not be the sole organizing principle on which how to figure out how we are all going to get untied from the train track, because we are.